So a lot has been made over the past sort of couple of weeks about reforms, numbers. These, oh my God, look at the numbers. They've got more members now than the Tory pie. Again, if they are real, and it is an if still. There has been a lot of interesting, should we say, comments highlighted on Twitter and etc. That yeah, people could buy multiple memberships and even sign up people who didn't even know that they were Reform Party members all of a sudden. So, yeah, a lot of, dodgy stuff going on over there. But it would be interesting if Nigel Farage, as I said before, does take Kimmy Badenoch to court over this, because Kimmy Badenoch will be allowed discovery. And that will mean that Nigel Farage actually has to hand over his database. And well, at that point, they can look into find out whether those numbers are real or not. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. I don't think Farage, quite frankly, will go the distance on it. What has happened, however, very interestingly, is you've got Professor Tim Bale. And Tim Bale, big, politics professor. I can't remember which university he is, but he did something very interesting recently. And he went and actually had a look at Reform members. He actually went and had a look at what Reform members actually think, what they want, and not too surprisingly, there are a lot of similarities between them and the Conservatives. And I've said this whenever we've covered, the Conservative Party is dying. It's going to die off. One of the big problems Kimmy Badenoch is going to face over this year is, why are you going to get these people to join back to the Conservatives? Because from what you will be seeing in a moment, they, in some cases, are more conservative, or at least think they are more conservative than the actual Conservative Party. And also, we've said, why are you going to vote for Reform Light when you can have Reform Full Fat? So, yeah, Kimmy Badenoch got a big year ahead. And as we've often said, dealing with reform is going to be a feature, and she's going to get judged on that as well, especially when we come to May's local elections. But before we get on to that, let's dive in to this data, because I think this is kind of interesting, and like the results are kind of interesting as well. So before we do that, though, like I say, click on the like, click on the share button. Down below, there's the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link where you can go buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. The House. Who are Reform members? So Nigel Farage has been banging on about his people's army for over a decade. It turns out now that he's finally recruited one. Reform UK says it now has a membership well over 100,000, overtaking that of the Conservatives. So, who are these members? What are they like? What do they think? And what might they do for the party? Just after the election, the Party Members Project, ran out of Queen Mary's University in London and Sussex, surveyed the members of over 5 UK-wide political parties, including Reform UK. And here's what we found. Age-wise, there is not too much now distinguishing Reform UK from other parties, especially the Conservatives. Their average age is 61. Not surprising when hardly any of them are aged 18 to 24, and nearly half of them are over 65, and a third of them are aged between 50 and 64. So there is yet another party that technically doesn't have a long lifespan. And you can see this is why Farage is going after TikTok, going after like youth, or at least making reform influencers, because that's what he wants. He wants and has told them, you have to get online. You have to take the battle online. And that is an area where I will say Reform UK has done a lot better than other parties, especially since this morning we found out, I think on TikTok, the official Labour Party had been sharing photos of like anamorphized animals, and it's just really weird. It's just really weird, guys. You again, yeah, it's really weird. But there you go. Of course, like members, of course, of other parties, they are predominantly middle class. 6 out of 10 in them fall into the ABC1 category, although that would still, of course, make Reform an ever, even so slightly more working class party than either Brexit or even UKIP. It is also a little less male dominated. Even though 6 out of 10 members are, of course, men, it is not, however, more representative, of course, of the north of the Midlands, whose parties, are, of course, were about a fifth of members come from each of the two regions. But London centric, they are not. Only 5% actually live in London's capital. As to their values, they are particularly keen on order, fairness, love of country, tradition. Then, not surprising. And some 95% did agree that respect for authority is something all children need to learn. And some 89% said they were proud of Britain's history. So there's no more likely than their conservative counterparts to appreciate criticism, of course, of our imperial past. And Reform members were even more likely to think then, quote, men and women have different roles to play in society, as a statement which 85% of them agreed. More generally, overall, a lot of them voted to leave, and some 90% of them do see themselves as on the right of the ideological spectrum. 29% said centre of right, and 50% said fairly right wing, and just 11% said very right wing. Well, this also reinforces the fact that once again, the Conservatives are fighting for that same block of vote, and that will damage them very, very significantly. But also bear in mind, it will damage Reform because they're fighting for the same number of voters. They will pull from each other. And we have seen this countless times on the left of where we've seen examples like this of, well, if we all vote for this party, then we might actually really do something and achieve something. But oh no, you've got to vote for this party because they're not ideologically as pure, hence splits the vote. Guess what? In the past, we have suffered for that because the Conservatives have always had that very big block where they don't have to compete for votes. Now they do. They are worried about it. But just as we've seen in polls from other parties, it also affects Reform as well. So as far as, of course, individual policy issues are concerned, Reform members look a bit like Tory members, only more so and occasionally much more so. For example, the opposition to the UK's commitment to cutting carbon emissions to net zero by 2050 is at least fairly widespread among the Conservative grassroots at 45%. Among Reform members, that figure rises to 86%. On immigration, the gap is much smaller. Proportion of members think immigration has been too high over the last decade, is at 92% for the Conservatives and 89% for Reform UK. Interestingly, there is, and this is where it might be a little bit awkward mismatch between Reform's members and its target voters. Some 56% of the party's members thought the government should cut taxes and spend less on public services rather than increase taxes and spending or leave things as they are, since only 44% of Tory members said the same. Reform members may well be more Thatcherite than they are. So this is something that we've actually seen. I think that's an important split to identify because we have seen this over the past couple of years. That you look at the public in general, when we've seen this before in other polls, that people want spending on on public services. They want spending on public services, which means how do you pay for it? Well, higher taxes. And it's this other sort of group that has been fomenting this argument in the Conservative Party, which we saw play out for years, and never really get solved or, admit, well, actually, the public want this, but, we want to cut taxes. But then what do you do about all these public services, which many people want and expect to have at least a high standard of? Can't do that if you're going to, be promoting lower taxes. So, Reform members are also, of course, huge fans of Farage. Not surprising, perhaps, when the top three qualities of reform leaders, of at least reform members, picked out qualities that Farage possesses, of course, in abundance, saying being able to stand up for the UK in dealing with other countries at 61%, being in touch with the ordinary people at 55%, and being a good communicator, 37%. Well, Farage isn't in touch with ordinary people. let's put it that way. It's been said a lot before. If you get Farage off the topic of immigration, like you pull him onto other subjects, that's where he starts being really bad, and he starts being massively out of touch with other people, especially when it comes to things like healthcare and the NHS. Very, very out of touch with a lot of other people on that. Digging deeper, of course, into the dark side of Reform UK's members on the leadership only strengthens the impression that Farage is very much the right man in the right job. Only 14% they didn't like charismatic leaders who show off every now and then, against 55% who did. A mere 5% weren't keen on leaders who can give as good as they got on social media. Whereas 81% were, and a whopping 96% said that they were into leaders who, quote, leaders who aren't afraid of speaking bluntly and stirring up a bit of a controversy. Again, what does that achieve, though? Controversy. That could be almost a whole topic in itself, but yeah, there you go. So the People's Army is, of course, right behind Farage, but does that mean they will help him win the electoral war, particularly the ground war? If the answer involves leafleting and canvassing, perhaps not. During the 2024 election campaign, Reform UK members were generally less likely to get involved in those activities than members of other parties. And again, that will work against their favour, because even though a lot of people were saying, well, actually, leafleting and canvassing, is dying, it's not. I think leafleting and canvassing, they're still very, very important. But the difference is here is age. If you expect, as you saw up there, these, 60 plus odd people to go out and leaflet and canvass, they're not going to do the necessary, they're not going to be, shall we say, able enough or fit enough, in many cases, to probably go and do that legwork. Because you have to do not just one street and then go home. You have to do like entire neighborhoods. Like if you go out canvassing, you are expecting to be out either A, pretty much all the morning to like mid-afternoon, or from like afternoon well into the evening when it starts to get dark. Or you are expected to do the full day. you know? And like I say, most people at that age can't do that. I'll find it very, very difficult to do that. So, if, however, and this is where, again, we talked earlier on about Farage encouraging people to get online. If we're talking about online, then it's a very different story. We asked whether members said, quote, shared or even liked something that they promoted their party or policies on social media. The responses: Tories at 45%, Lib Dems at 48%, Labour at 57%, Greens at 67%, and Reform UK were at top at 71%. So watch this space: Facebook, TikTok, and X, or at least Twitter, should we say, in that. But yeah, interesting findings. Not a lot really, I think, surprised me, to be honest, when you look at that. But that doesn't seem to me overly good news, because you've got a party there, as we said, is competing for the exact same vote the Tories are. And just as Reform UK pulls away from the Tories will pull away from Reform UK. That vote is split. There is a reason why Nigel Farage is now going to make it his mission, I think, over the next couple of years, or at least until the next general election, to try and kill off the Tories. Like, that is his aim. That is his goal. If he wants to cement himself as like the big, like, political right-wing bloc, he has to get rid of the Tories. One way or another, he has to get rid of the Tories. So expect, I think, a lot of Tory bashing coming from Reform UK over the next couple of years, if not for the rest of this year. We've already seen the initial skirmish in the threatening to take Kimmy Badnock to court over the reform numbers. But we'll see if that actually happens. But expect more things like that. Expect more fights like that to happen. Because that's what Farage's aim is now, to kill off the Tory party so that his party, that voting block, is now his. Like, no one else, no other party dare occupy it. That is now his. That is his alone. The other thing that I think is worth reminding you, and I think not even this has passed the mind of other people. What if Farage, cocks it? He's not exactly the most healthiest person. I mean, he smokes, he drinks quite a lot. He's not exactly, should we say, a spry spring chicken. Would only take a stroke, and then so much for Mr. Charismatic, Mr. Personality. There is no continuity for Raj, which, to be honest, I think Kimmy Badnock would be praying nightly for to happen. But that's another story. Like I say, there is no continuity for Raj. Could someone take it over? Who? Farage has made it very, very clear and done a very, very good job of putting down anyone else who might, shall we say, share the spotlight. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, click the link, click the likes on your way out. Links down below, Patreon page, buy me a coffee link, YouTube thank you button, Pony Club, etc. All down below. And of course, as always, have a very good day. It's a snow day up here in Yorkshire. So as always, we'll see you all next time.